Hello and welcome, everybody, to the last event on day one of the 2023 US Expat Finance Conference, brought to you by usexpatdirectory.com and sponsored by AngloInfo. We have a fantastic schedule for you over the course of 3 days, 12 sessions in total, covering multiple aspects of financial and tax planning for Americans living overseas, with perspectives from some of the world's foremost experts in US expat finances. Today is our Money Matters Day, and this event is the apex of our first day, a panel session featuring two of our speakers from earlier, I should say. So I'm delighted to be joined by David Tompkins, President of Expat Financial Expat Insurance Solutions, Eva Slacheva, Senior Business Manager at MoneyCore, and Karen Des, who is a Director at AngloInfo. Welcome, everybody. And what I'll do is if I may, ask you one by one to introduce yourself and your organization so the audience gets a feel for your area of expertise. Karen, would you like to start?
Great. Okay. I'm Karen Dace from AngloInfo. I am the sales director for AngloInfo. We have 90 different sites in 30 different countries for expats. So we are a very good vector for reaching expat clients, and also very useful to expats living far away from home, many of whom obviously need information in English on how to settle in. I'm obviously from South Africa, as you can tell from my accent, but I've lived in France since the year 2000. That's me.
That's great. Eva?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Eva Slacheva, Business Development Manager with MoneyCore. I'm actually originally from Bulgaria, but now officially a Floridian, enjoying sunny Florida. Although I'm wearing a sweater, it's a little cool. It's our Florida winter right now. But I've lived here for a while, so this is home now. It's my 9th year working at MoneyCore. We specialize in currency exchange and international payments. The majority of the clients I work with are Americans and Canadians who are purchasing properties, making investments over in Europe and UK. We help them transfer money at far better rates of exchange than the banks. We help them save a ton of money on the margin on the exchange rate. We try to make the process as safe and secure as possible. So that's me.
And David.
Yes, so it's David Tompkins. I am the president of THG Global Insurance Solutions. We run our division Expat Financial. I've been in the insurance business since around 1991 and branched out into the expat field, at first with corporations that employ expats in around 2000. And then very quickly, the website, we went into the individual side, for individual expats who are living abroad, global nomads, eventually digital nomads. And our specialty is we're an independent, again, we should also say we're an independent insurance brokerage. We represent you, the client, not the insurer, deal with a whole bunch of different insurance companies. Our specialty is primarily global health plans for expats, as well as expat life and disability. I'm based in Vancouver and work with a lot of American expats, but also expats of multiple nationalities living around the globe. And I have extensive experience in this field. Most of the expats, they get quotes online or on our website Expat Financial, but they also can call, email, chat with us. So I'm very pleased to be here today and join the panel.
Thank you very much, David. Well, the point of this session isn't our panelists aren't going to do presentations. They did presentations earlier. Karen is here to assist me as I suppose, a panel host rather than an expert. And what we'd like is you as the audience, if you have questions relating to international currency transfers for expats, to international insurance for expats, drop them into the Q&A function at the foot of your screen, where some of you have already posted where you are. And our experts will answer those for you. So really, this is an opportunity for you to ask your questions. don't ask something super specific that is probably, should be a private conversation. You can reach out to our experts afterwards for that. But if you'd like to start putting some questions, thinking some questions for our experts, this is what this session's for. And our first question is for you, Karen.
I was just trying to answer that quickly.
I run the sales team. About Anglo Info.
I run the sales. Yeah, exactly. Obviously didn't say enough. I run the sales team for Anglo Info, which is a website for expats living overseas. So I'm one of the coordinators of tonight's evening, and I'm sure that if you have questions for me, I'm more than happy to take them up tomorrow. But really, the two panelists, Eva and David, are the stars of the show. So if you have questions on expat health insurance and or money matters, that's really what we're hoping to hear from you this evening. And as I say, I'm more than happy to get back to the person who was asking me the question. But people would have our contact details, would they?
They don't. I think we can. Well, if you'd like to, you can drop them into the chat function at the foot of the screen, and that might be useful for those who'd like to reach out afterwards with questions.
Okay.
So, yeah,
I should put my email address right in there.
I should add that both David and Eva have answered a lot of questions in their talks earlier, so it may be that if it's the same audience that they've already had questions answered. But guys, drop your questions into the Q&A box, and let's see if we can get them answered.
There's one here that's I think for Eva. Is it better to use a euro-denominated credit card from a local bank, or US issued credit card with no international transaction fees when living in France?
Good question.
To be for you.
Well, it would really depend on the bank, on the credit card, on the situation. I think I personally, when I go to Europe, I use my credit card mostly, which has no international transaction fees, like the client mentioned, but I'm not living there full time. I think if you are living there and, consistently spending money, I would assume having euros in a local account, having a local card might be better long-term. But double check with your bank. I mean, as far as what my company offers, there's no cards associated with a MoneyCorp account. We can help you move money from the US to France. We can help you save on the exchange when converting from dollars to euros and help you avoid the international wire fees. But then once that money lands in your French bank account, you just spend it as normal locally with a debit card or, of course, a local credit card. So check the fine print on your credit card, check with each bank and compare. But I personally use my US credit card when I visit.
Thanks, Eva. Here's a question. So just a general question while we're waiting for some more to come in. Again, for Eva, but what are typical mistakes expats make when, for example, purchasing something abroad and they need to transfer money from the US, maybe a car when they move abroad, or real estate?
Yep, absolutely. I think oftentimes, unfortunately, the currency exchange piece gets left until the very last thing on the to-do list when someone is making a purchase. You worry about finding a home or finding your car or lining up all the legal work. And then last minute you go, oh, we gotta move our money. How are we gonna do that? And I think when that until the very last minute, you're allowing yourselves to be more exposed to the currency exchange fluctuations. The currency exchange is live, it's always ticking. It's sometimes moving in your favor, sometimes moving against you. So really you want to transact and when the exchange rate is favorable, obviously. So how do you know when it's favorable? Well, when you start that process earlier, if you're investing in a property and are about to be moving a large amount of money, I would say 6 months is when you should open up the MoneyCorp account. You should start speaking with your dedicated currency dealer so that someone who knows the market is watching the market on your behalf and keeping you updated on those rate movements. If the exchange rate is favorable for you now, but you're not buying your property until Christmas. Well, why not purchase some euros now, take advantage of the exchange rate now, and then Christmas time or end of the year, you transfer those euros out of the account. So I think waiting until the last minute is a big one. Obviously, using a bank rather than a currency exchange company in general, big one. They are just not suited for currency exchange. They'll take a high margin on the exchange rate and they'll add on those international wire fees. So just get educated, ask for quotes, start the process early, and it will definitely benefit you. And also remember, if you're an American investing abroad, you're negotiating the price on the property or the car or whatever you're buying, but you're negotiating that price in euros, for example. But the real cost, the true cost of that investment is how much US dollars you're going to transfer out to purchase. So really don't leave it till last minute and start the process early.
That's great, because somebody dropped a question saying, why would you talk about currency exchange when buying a property? But it's actually fundamental. Your currency exchange when you're transferring money from the US to buy that property.
Yes, and I think they were saying when. So again, I would say 6 months. Some of our clients even start a year out. You can start as early as you'd like. One of the options that we offer is locking into a rate of exchange for up to 2 years. So think back on the exchange rate movements that we saw over the last few years, due to the, war between Russia and Ukraine, all these significant global events, they pushed that US dollar up. So a lot of our investors locked into the rate, even if they don't have a property lined up, just taking advantage of it, really. Huge savings.
David, question for you. So, say somebody is a digital nomad. This is something we covered earlier, but for those who aren't there, say somebody is a digital nomad. Is that a common scenario you see for people looking for global expat health insurance?
So do we see a lot of global nomads getting health insurance? Yeah, it's definitely quite common now. People that, I think with COVID, it kind of definitely obviously accelerated the push to people moving abroad, because they figured, why, I'm working from anyway, I might as well I might as well work abroad. But again, they probably, once they got there, they might have just got travel medical insurance, which is really just going to cover emergencies only and for a limited amount of time. So they are a lot, especially in 2020 was one of our biggest years. We had a lot of people that were scrambling to get really high quality global healthcare. So that's what we can source for people. They just have to provide the main country that they're going to be living abroad in, because that's how the insurers base their rates.
And what other scenarios would you recommend global health insurance for expats?
Really just about everyone. If they're not covered by a really high quality universal health system that might be free, and they're not, if they're not eligible for local coverage. The problem with, if expats that are going to the UK, we find a lot of them will get the NHS, but they might get a top-up plan in the UK, which are perfectly good, but it's only going to cover them in the UK most likely. So they might still get a global health plan that will cover them in the UK, but also if they move to a new country, or to get medical care back in their home country. So in most cases, there's some advantages to, obviously local plans are usually cheaper, but obviously the more developing a country is, probably the coverage will be more suspect. But and we do get some people that will get the local coverage because they have to, it's mandated, but they might still get an expat health plan to cover on top of that.
There's a very interesting question on somebody who's living in France who says, I'm thoroughly confused by Assurance Vie, which seems to be a popular investment vehicle here that avoids inheritance taxes, but are a third rail for Americans because of IRS tax treatment. Do you know the answer, or could you point this person to somebody who can answer that for them, David?
For me, no, I wouldn't have an answer to that question, I'm afraid. I'm not sure. Probably have to talk to a expat tax or legal advisor in France, or that has specialty in that.
Yeah, it's a tricky
Valerie,
one. It's quite
that's a
specific.
tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Valerie, if you can
Um,
see my email in the chat box, I can help you, point you towards somebody who can help you with that question, because you have to know and understand the French system, particularly in order to answer that question. And I can point you in the right direction tomorrow if you send me an email.
Yeah, I was going to say, you need an expat tax, a US expat tax expert who's very familiar with France. And I'm sure, as you say, you live in France, Karen, so that's great. One for Eva. If you lock into 2 years at a rate favorable at the time, but is lower at the time you need it, do you give the lower amount, or is the client stuck with the locked-in rate?
That's a good question. We get that asked actually quite a bit. So when you enter into a forward contract, essentially, it's a verbal and legally binding agreement. The client is putting down 10% of the total amount that they'll eventually require in euros, for example. But what Money Corp does in the background is we're purchasing the total amount of euros that the client is ultimately needing. And we will not release those euros out until the end of the contract comes and the client has paid the rest of the US dollars. Now, if at any point the client wishes to exit that contract, what will happen is Money Corp will need to sell all the euros and purchase back dollars. And we will do so at the exchange rate live at that moment in time when the client is exiting the contract. If there is a loss involved when we're selling the euros and purchasing back dollars versus the initial trade, then the client is liable for that. And we make that very, very clear prior to the client entering that contract to make sure they fully understand. Now, there are times when it's still worth it to exit the contract, pay the loss, rebook, because the exchange rate has so significantly moved that at the end of the day, the client is still benefiting from doing this action. But I will also say it's quite rare. A lot of the time, the reason clients will exit a forward contract is family emergency, something extraordinary has happened in their life. Their plans have changed. It's usually not the rate moved, so I want to exit that contract. We make that very clear in the beginning. It's not a money-making activity. It's a protect your investment activity. So the reason you're locking in is because you want to ensure that there's going to be no surprises and that no matter what the rate does up or down, you can buy this property. It's not so much, I want to lock in because I want to make money. I mean, sure, maybe some people enter it with that thought, but that's not how it should be looked at. It should be, can I protect my investment? Can I be sure I can make those payments? But yes, you can exit a contract, but there might be a loss involved if the exchange rate has moved against you.
Interesting.
And if you don't want to enter the forward contract and be stuck with it, you can just do slow purchases, such as just pre-purchase a small amount of euros now, pre-purchase an extra amount of euros later, and then you're not, stuck in a larger amount contract situation. So the currency dealer will go over all the options. We never want to, anyone to enter any sort of currency exchange trade without fully understanding all the ramifications and pros and cons of it.
I can see, David, you're sort of typing some answers to questions, but actually I think some of them might be more interesting to discuss a little.
Sure.
For example, somebody said, should we have appropriate healthcare insurance in place when we apply for a long-term visa to live in France? And I think the interesting thing about that is that there's often that period, if you move to perhaps France or a lot of European countries, you will at some point qualify for the national health system in that country, but maybe not immediately. It can take, there can be a sort of period of 6 months up to a few years until you do, depending on the country. So is that a good time to purchase a global health insurance? To cover
that's an excellent question. So yes, you can always get a quote, even a year in advance, just to give an idea of the cost via our website. from one of the more well-known insurers that we have. You can't apply for the coverage until 45 days prior to moving abroad, and the insurance coverage should start the day you move abroad, because they're not meant. These expat health plans are they can't cover, for example, an American citizen who's going to be living in the U.S. So that generally, again, the requirements for the insurers that the coverage should start the day you leave the U.S. And you can apply 45 days prior. But again, note for these plans that for an expat health plan, they are individually underwritten, so you have to be in okay health to get approved. You might get an exclusion for a pre-existing condition. They might cover it, they might not, or unfortunately, sometimes people do get declined coverage. And you can, if you do get the coverage in place, you can keep it and cancel it, in 2 or 3 years when you are eligible for local coverage in a place like France. Or you can keep the coverage in place. It's really up to you.
There's another interesting Money Matters question, Eva. I'm not sure if it is your remit, but let's have a bash. What is the best way to invest long term? This particular attendee lives in Switzerland and has a dual USA Swiss citizenship. And the banks in Switzerland declined to do asset management for USA citizens. And this person says, I don't know if this is the right forum, but thought I'd ask anyway. How? Do you know?
I wouldn't be able to specifically advise on this, but I might certainly know people that can help them. I think with that, just like the client mentioned, I live here and I'm dual citizen. That matters a lot. There's specific advisors that specialize in certain countries and not others. So if this person can shoot us an email afterwards, just re-asking the same question, and I can sort of look through my list of contacts and see if there's somebody that can better guide him through that, because we do work with many wealth advisors, many investment advisors throughout the world. So I think one of them should be able to help with this one. So just shoot over an email if possible, and I'll try to connect you with the best person.
Yeah, I think
there's another interesting one for David.
Hold on, Karen, before you dive into that one, I would add on that point about I mean, that's to do with sort of FATCA laws, and it's a sort of US tax question about not being able to access asset management, and there's sometimes sort of some banking products. We do the day after tomorrow, we've got 4 sessions with loads of filled with expat tax experts, and that would be the place to ask that question as well. One of the firms doing a presentation on Thursday as part of this conference has an office in Switzerland, and they're experts on the situation in Switzerland as well. So that's another opportunity for you to ask that question.
Gee, that's a very useful answer. Thank you. The question that I was just looking at for it's interesting because it's really for both of you. It's a French-American, accidental American, born and living in France to American parents, wants to explore working in the US in engineering, and they want advice on reverse expat situations, insurance, French bank accounts, other considerations to take into account for a smooth landing.
Okay.
Seems as if both of you could answer that one.
I can take the money part. So if you're looking to move funds from France to US, you can certainly use Money Corp, just the reverse transfer process. We have local accounts over in Europe where we can easily receive your euros so that you're not paying an international wire fee funding the account. We'll help you convert euros to dollars, and then we can transfer the dollars to any US bank account. It could be your own personal account, or more likely, if you are renting a property or purchasing a property, we can directly make that payment to the title company or any recipient bank account you advise. Typically, US banks are a little tough on allowing you to open a bank account if you don't have a US address associated to your name. So initially, you might find it a bit hard to set up the US bank account until you have an address, and then you can easily set one up. But again, you don't necessarily need it at first, because we can transfer the dollars directly to title company for closing or any other account in question. And then going forward, you can continue, slowly transferring from France to US for living expenses and such. US banks love to charge fees, so watch out for those incoming wire fees. So if you're, again, using MoneyCorp, just make sure you ask us to send your payment using ACH instead of wire or SWIFT, so that your US bank doesn't hit you with those incoming wire fees as well. So easily done. And again, plan ahead.
Yeah, I guess for us, I mean, if you're a dual national, like an American and I guess French citizen moving to the US, we wouldn't be able to source global health coverage or expat health coverage for an American living in the US. So we wouldn't be able to assist you. If you're an American, if you have that American citizenship and you're going to be moving to the US or back to the US, then I would say you should probably get a locally compliant plan in the US. You should be eligible for a plan depending on the state and where you live. So
well, that's interesting. So if a French person or a Brit, for example, when they move to the US, you can, but because they're also an American citizen in this case, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if they're American, they should, like an American,
because
it's a dual national living US, they need to get a locally compliant US plan that to cover them. If they're an expat and they're not eligible for local coverage and they're not in certain states like New York, example, then they should be able to source a local plan. But my model is basically locals should be in local plans, with very few exceptions. I mean, we have insured the odd local in a developing country, but more often than not, it's just expats.
And if they will be working, which it sounds like they will be working in the US, likely the employer might have some benefit options anyway. It's part of their benefits package. So it might be better to compare those versus getting a private plan. It might be cost beneficial. Yeah,
definitely. If you can get an expat, if you're an expat abroad, you can get an expat benefit plan, health plan, then on a group basis, that's always your best choice, because most of those plans will cover you without any questions asked. They'll cover pre-existing conditions because they can spread the risk. And if you're moving to the US and you can get on a company plan, that's always your best bet. And as far as I've always seen.
There's another question. Yep. Sorry, I'm cutting across you, Mr. Lesser. There's another question for you, David, from a US citizen planning to live in France once retired. Would I still be eligible for Medicare coverage when visiting the US?
No, I probably hasn't. I mean, I'm not a specialist. I don't really dabble in domestic coverage in the US. So I don't think I could answer that. I mean, I would think regardless that you should be, but I couldn't really answer that definitively.
I was going to say something in general about MoneyCorp and the benefits of companies like MoneyCorp for if you're transferring money internationally, which so many expats do need to. And I think the premise, which Eva did explain it when she did a talk earlier on today, but it's worth reiterating after seeing a couple of questions, is if you use your bank, either in the US or a foreign bank, to send or receive if a bank-to-bank international money transfer, you're going to end up with a lot less of the money you started with than if you use a company like MoneyCorp. And that's why it's these MoneyCorp and similar firms are excellent at saving expats money, transferring internationally by just offering a much better exchange rate and lower or no fees. And it's not just large amounts. The example we were talking about, buying real estate or buying something, it's, I think I'm right in saying, small amounts too, if you have small regular payments to make. Is that about right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're hired. Yeah, you're ready to present. The minimum amount is $250, and there is no maximum. So we can certainly do all sorts of payments, and it doesn't have to be related to property. It could be someone moving over a pension, an inheritance, living expenses, sending money to pay for school or wedding. As long as it's a legal reason to move money, we're happy to move it.
Let's have a look. Yes, I've got. Well, there's some quite good chat going on in the questions, questions. So we're learning things here too. What's this? We have some property in Russia got caught by the outbreak of war and sanctions. We want to sell and move the money to Israel. We are not oligarchs. Good, good. Or not. I don't know. It's good to be an oligarch or not. I'm not sure. We have only met sharks so far. Is there anyone in the market who can handle documentation for that? That's one for you again, Eva, I think.
So if it's money being moved from Russia at the moment, we cannot help. To my knowledge, there's restrictions put in place, unfortunately, for almost any other international payments company I can think of. That started obviously in February of last year. That might change in the future. As of right now, we cannot send money to Russia or help with a transfer from Russia. I don't know which way to unfortunately point this attendee to. Don't have an answer. I wish I did. It's might be a wait and see game, and see if sanctions lessen up soon. But at this moment in time, we just cannot help.
That's a tricky one. Do you have any clients in Russia, David?
At the moment, I think I have a few, but just for like expat health insurance.
And that's still covered.
But I think, I have to see a lot of them have moved out for obvious reasons. But it's getting really, the insurers have to be compliant with all the sanctions rules. So certainly getting reimbursement would be tricky. They might have to reimburse to a bank outside of Russia. Yeah, in terms of paying to a Russian medical facility would be very tricky as well, because again of the sanctions.
You were saying earlier that with the global health plans that you can evacuate to somewhere else if you want treatment somewhere else, wherever you are.
Yeah, I mean, in medical evacuation is you're in a place which doesn't have really good medical treatment, not up to first world standards, if you want to call it that. So there, one would contact the insurer. They would probably have a good idea whether you can be treated there or not. Deal with the medical provider, and then if they need to medically evacuate you, they would medically evacuate you to the nearest center of medical excellence. So it's not like you can't choose. I don't like the treatment here. I want to be medically evacuated. It doesn't work like that. It has to be a good reason for it, and it has to be approved and coordinated by the insurer. But, we've had a lot of clients that have had to be evacuated, especially out of some very tricky places.
You got a good story about one?
Oh, well, I've had a lot of clients who've been in, for example, DRC, which can treat minor stuff, but they've had people had to be medically evacuated. So it has to be. It's always tricky. It's a lot of moving parts, very complex. So there's have to bring in a jet or plane of some sort in there with doctor, nurses, and they have to get the visas, and it has to be sometimes people need evacuated, but they can't land at night. So it can be. It's definitely a very complex. Bottom line, if you're going to want to get medical evacuation right, or if you're in a country with not so good medical care, or you're going to be doing a lot of traveling to places which don't have very good medical care. I mean, if you're just going to be staying in Italy, the chance of using medical evacuation is very minimal, unless you need to be heli-vac'd somewhere. That would be. But medical evacuation can be very expensive. It can be 50, 100,000 without batting an eye.
Yeah, I can imagine. And as you say,
But they're not going to medically evacuate. If you're in DRC or Cambodia, they're not going to medically evacuate you all the way back to the US. I mean, if you're in Cambodia, they're probably going to evacuate you to Thailand or Singapore, for example. Yeah.
And it's probably something doesn't happen that often, I would imagine. Or
No.
do you see? No.
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often. Really depends on where
Yeah.
clients are located.
Yeah. Well, expats are always, I think, adventurous souls. So I'm sure they do. I know they do get to all the far-flung places of the world. So yeah, you can imagine it does happen. But for the purposes of this, Karen, can you see any other?
Excuse me, the very interesting one, again, I'm not sure if either of you can help, but we're an American family living in France. We have a wealth management company in the US that we'd like to keep. Is there a wealth management company that will assist us only with our EU, France, and Ireland assets? Most that I have spoken to want us to move our money in the US under their management as well. Do you have any insight on that one, Eva, with your contacts?
Strangely or funnily enough, I just connected with someone this morning who specializes in working with Americans, specifically in France, and managing their investments and assets. So I'd be more than happy to share his info with Almenia. If she's able to just, again, shoot me an email reacting that question after we're finished, I'll be happy to share that contact with her. It sounds like this person might be perfect to assist in this situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, just to add to that, tomorrow we have some other sort of financial planners based in Europe who specialize in Europe. So have a look at the sessions for tomorrow, and you may find some more insights there as well, or alternatives. Yes.
Well done, Hugo. You seem to have invited some really interesting people along, because from the questions
You're just
here.
flattering yourself now.
No, it's not a question of flattery. It's a question of having lived myself in Kenya, in Mauritius, from South Africa, and in France. It's very important to have all these questions answered. And the fact that you've got people coming up that can deal with other aspects of this is well done. You've chosen a good team, it seems to me. So, of course, it is flattery as well.
I'll take it.
Yes, we've got lots of interesting topics, lots of interesting speakers, and over the course of the next couple of days. David, there's a question here for you. It says, do you specialize in healthcare insurance, or can you answer questions about other types of insurance? It says, e.g., homeowners, business, self-employed insurances. I'm not sure how that would work globally, though. For
no, we don't do rental, that kind of insurance. We can refer someone to someone who should be able to assist. Our specialty is like global health insurance, expat life and disability coverage.
Yeah, which are the sort of insurance you'd want internationally.
We do travel insurance as well.
So those are the sorts of insurance that you'd want internationally, as it were. If something, expats travel, many expats travel, or either back and forth to the US or spend time in different countries, and that's where the sort of global insurance is, I think.
I mean, if they're just going abroad for a short period of time, most people will just get travel medical insurance. And if they're going abroad for 6 months or under a year, they're going to keep their health coverage back home. I mean, if they're going to be true expats or global nomads abroad, then they would get expat health insurance. They might get some life insurance, they might not. It depends on their situation. Do they have dependents, for example? Do they have a big mortgage? If they can keep their domestic US life insurance in place, and they should be able to, they should definitely do so. Don't cancel it, because any expat life insurance plans out there are going to be a lot more than you'll pay for a domestic plan in the US. But in terms of like liability, we don't get into, or housing, but we can try to refer people to sources.
One for you, Eva. What are typical mistakes? You've probably covered a couple. What are typical mistakes you see an expats transferring money internationally?
Well, I feel like a broken record, but again, waiting until the last minute, big one. Also just sometimes just not being aware of certain US bank regulations. US banks, I think, are getting stricter and stricter due to anti-money laundering rules and regulations. And sometimes when someone abroad is trying to access their own US bank account and transfer out a larger amount of money, they might be faced with bumps in the road. And sometimes US banks require you to be physically present at the branch in order to initiate a large payment out. And it's your money, you need it when you need it. So that's the last thing you want to hear sometimes when you're trying to move money. So I would just say get in touch with your bank early on. If you know you're going to have a large payment to make, ask them what are your online banking capabilities, ask them if there's any limits in place, can those limits be lifted? Ask all the questions earlier enough so that you're aware of how you can make this payment out. From what I hear, US banks are only set to keep tightening the rules and regulations when it comes to banking. And another thing I'm noticing is you Americans who are now living in Europe, if you no longer have a US address associated with your name, banks sometimes are not very friendly to that. And I'm noticing some accounts being closed. Clients will get a letter just sort of stating you have 60 days to make arrangements. So again, just I would say learn about your own bank and what they can and cannot do, what your capabilities are with online banking, because it might really backfire last minute when you're trying to move a larger amount of money out.
There is actually a question that talks to that at the end of the chat at the moment that says they have retirement investments in the US, but they live in New Zealand. And it seems as if the US is gradually freezing expats out and making access more difficult. Would it be more sensible to transfer my assets to New Zealand? And if so, are you able to advise on how to do this?
Yes, I assume they might have experienced or are experiencing a little bit of what I mentioned. As far as is it sensible for your money, for your own requirement, that might be a question better asked to a tax advisor or your wealth manager as to the pros and cons. But if you wish to move it, then yes, we'd be happy to move it if you make the decision to move it. But again, you'd have to check with your US bank to see the limits. There might be a situation of you having to slowly transfer funds out either every day or every week until you get to the total amount you eventually want to move out. So really matter of just planning ahead and doing so, but we can certainly help with that transfer.
Another one for you, Eva. Do you ever handle money transfers related to an international business purchase? Any advice on that?
Yes, perfect. Thanks for that question. Yeah, a lot of what I talked about today was individuals moving money, but we do certainly offer accounts for businesses, for corporations. We have a huge, actually, corporate presence in the US and Canada looking after those accounts, as well as in Europe, actually. So we can do so. We can help you. If you are an individual just investing in a business, doing so under an individual account, we can do that as well. I think a lot of the time, specifically when it's investments in Europe, you will be required to show a very clear flow of funds to show that you're using your own money to make the investment. We're used to providing those letters. It's just explaining that you funded your Moneycorp account, that you booked this conversion to euros and transferred money to the recipient. So if needed, we can provide that extra paperwork. But yeah, we can help with business or individual purchases as needed.
David, it's one that I think you replied to in the chat, but a retired couple, for example, traveling in Europe on a long-term basis, maybe several months or a year, is that a scenario it'd be worth thinking about international global medical insurance for?
Well, if it's just a couple of months, no, we don't really get into that where you're just needing like 6 months of global healthcare coverage. They would normally just get travel medical insurance to cover emergencies for short-term trips. They're going to keep their health coverage back home. Just again, these travel insurance plans are going to be a lot less expensive, but also more appropriate for someone who's just wanting, a short trip abroad. If they're going to be real global nomads or expats and have an address of some sort abroad, then yeah, we could definitely source an expat health plan for them.
That's interesting. That's the
And
sort
most
of
likely
difference.
the Cigna plan would be, the one thing about our Cigna plan that we offer is that they can cover expats up to just about any age, even if they're 72, and they can keep it as long as they're expats. So it's lifetime coverage as long as they remain an expat.
So that's interesting what you're saying. So that's the sort of, if you're going to have an address abroad, because lots of people go abroad for a work placement as well, which may be a year or something like that. And again, in that scenario, you'll have an address abroad. You should think about international medical insurance. Whereas if you're, in a sense, that's the difference between traveling and living abroad, I guess, is having an address.
Yeah, I just want to it's somewhere abroad that they want to know really what is the main country that you're living in. They do realize that people don't stay in one place. A lot of people are moving from place to place. But if it's just a short-term trip, like 6 months, for example, and they're still a U.S. resident, for example, then we're not going to be able to sell an expat health plan for them because it's not. These expat health plans are offshore plans, and they're not compliant for U.S. citizens in the U.S., so we wouldn't be able to source something for them. They would probably just get a emergency travel medical insurance to cover an urgent situation that pops up. But if they get cancer or some sort of chronic condition like that, or the treatment, then they would go back to the U.S. for treatment under their domestic policy.
Yes, you were talking earlier in your session earlier about travel medical insurance. Should I say something a bit more about that? Can it be fairly long term as well? For example, for a digital nomad, would that be more appropriate if they don't have an abode, I guess, abroad?
No, I mean, they could just provide you can get a virtual address just about anywhere for the insurance use. I mean, it's costing next to nothing. They just, it's just a matter of if it's a short-term trip abroad and then you get travel medical, but we have seen some people that get travel medical insurance as expats, and they just renew it for another year and try to go on like that. But it's touchy. It's not ideal. If someone gets cancer, for example, or heart attack and they need a lot of treatment, travel insurance is not set up for that. It's really get the immediate need, patch you up, and then you really have to go back to your country of residence where you have health care. So if you're going to be a global nomad or digital nomad, you're still an expat in many respects. So you should get an expat global healthcare plan. And there's lots of ways to get some sort of address somewhere. It can be friends or whatever.
Yeah.
So
another one for you, David, was and it was one that came up earlier, but I think it was a really interesting one. And somebody asked, when you purchase health insurance, and you have to declare your existing medical conditions, how far back do you have to go? So if somebody had, some issues 20 years ago, do they kind of expire if you haven't had them since, so you don't have to declare them, or should you still, however long ago it was?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I would say, declare as far back as you can, especially something serious. I mean, if you went to the doctor for a cold like 20 years ago, I can't see that being something you'd report, something minor, but they're really looking for stuff that, if you had, cancer 20 years ago, you should report that, a heart attack or back or something like that. I think you really need to disclose as much as you can, because insurance companies, if you have a claim, all of a sudden it pops up, you have cancer and and you had similar one like 20 years ago, they're going to go, yeah, you were lying to us, right? We're not being fully truthful, and then that gives them a reason to cancel the policy for not providing. So you really, my general line is just provide as much detail as possible. And when you do it, try not to leave a bunch of question marks in their head, because the insurance underwriters always assume the worst until you provide full disclosure. You know, I haven't had any treatment for 5-10 years. But if you don't provide that little tidbit, then they're going to assume you're still under treatment, right?
So we're closing in on the hour. If you have any more questions, please do drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully have time to answer those. Another one that came up earlier that was really good was the idea: can somebody with MoneyCorp, can somebody receive US Social Security, for example, into it, so it gets transferred in a monthly basis, so it gets transferred directly abroad, or a salary, potentially US salary? Can that be paid to MoneyCorp for an expat and then transferred abroad to a foreign account?
Perfect. So if it's pension, Social Security, MoneyCorp can receive funds into the MoneyCorp account from any person or entity. Anybody can pay into the account, but likely Social Security pension companies will not do so, just because of their own rules and regulations. They really have to pay into your personal US bank account, and what you do with it after is up to you. So if you receive it into your personal US bank account, you can then set up, easy ACH payments to fund your MoneyCorp account with that money. So there's no fee involved for that payment, for that funding. And then once it's in your MoneyCorp account, you can exchange it and transfer it as and when you wish, either over the phone or using the online platform. And again, I think it's giving you more power over the timing and over your own money, because just because your pension arrives on the 1st of every month doesn't mean the exchange rate will be favorable for you on the 1st of every month. So you may want to keep it on account, and when the exchange rate is a little better, exchange it and transfer it at that point. If it's salary, then yes, I think that's more easily paid into the MoneyCorp account. You simply provide your employer, your company, with the set of your MoneyCorp account details, and they pay directly there. And a lot of our overseas clients utilize the account for that.
That's great. Let's just see if any last questions have come in. I think it's more of a comment than a question, that one. Experts have told me that you can actually have your Social Security pension directly deposited in euros into your French bank account without incurring currency exchange fees. I don't know about that.
I don't know about that.
Sounds unlikely.
There would be no reason for anyone to do that, really. Essentially, anytime any money is being moved and currency exchange is happening, somebody is making money off of it. No other way. I mean, somebody is taking some piece of that money along the way of it being exchanged and moved. But if that's true, please let me know, because I will move money using that method as well. But I highly doubt it, unfortunately.
Okay, I think we've answered pretty much all the questions that have come in. Thank you, everyone, very much for attending. Thank you, Eva, David, and Karen, our panelists. It's been a sort of bit of a mix and match session with 2 different topics, following David's and Eva's full talks earlier. But I think hopefully it's been useful, and we have lots of interesting events coming up over the next couple of days. So go over to usexpatconference.com if you haven't registered. All those questions about sort of banking and tax, and of course tax is always a big question. It's more complex for expats. So we've got lots of interesting sessions coming up, so do register for those. And hopefully you made a note of David and Eva's details if you have follow-up questions, which we pasted in the chat. So I think that just about wraps it up today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
having me. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day,
pleasure.
everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.